Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our April 10th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and this episode features a conversation with Iowa Farm Bureau President Brent Johnson following his recent visit to Vietnam and the Philippines as part of an Iowa trade delegation. And later in the episode, we'll bring on Brian Waddingham of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers to discuss a troubling livestock vandalism case in northeast Iowa, what the coalition is doing to help local law enforcement in the area, and tips for other livestock farmers to protect their barns from vandalism. We'll start with President Brent Johnson's conversation with spokesman editor Tom Block.
Brent, you recently returned from a trade mission to Vietnam and the Philippines. What motivated you to participate in the trade mission, and what were your expectations going into it?
Yeah, so the Vietnam and the Philippines, that was really a trip put together by the state of Iowa. And I wanted to make sure that Farm Bureau was represented on the trip because this specific one was dealing with emerging markets and trade. And it's been disappointing, the lack of trade conversations on the federal level. So what are those opportunities that we can do on the state level? And this is one of those opportunities.
What were some of your observations about those two countries and the potential for greater trade with the U.S.? Were there any surprises?
Both of those countries, in broad strokes, are there are opportunities for the United States for trade. We don't have a huge footprint there, but the countries economically, socially are emerging markets. And as those countries have increasing people entering the middle class, their ability to purchase higher protein levels of food, and really paints an opportunity in the coming years for the United States to become a dependent, reliable supplier for those middle class people.
You went to both the Vietnam and the Philippines. Were there differences between the two countries?
There certainly was. So Vietnam is still a communist country, so you have to have some of that focus in this conversation. But Vietnam is socially an older country. They're still coming along in their emergence towards middle class, but they do have tremendous GDP growth. I mean, they've talked about recent GDP growth annually of about 7%. Their average age in the entire country is 32. So to know that you have a very young country, the economy is growing rapidly, it speaks to those opportunities that you can see are coming in the future years. To make a little bit of a distinction, the Philippines they're more westernized in their culture. They're probably 1 or 2 generations ahead when it comes to the culture and some of those things. But the Philippines is even a younger country yet. Their average age is 24. And they've got, like I said, a westernized culture already, so some of those relationships are naturally built in a little easier than Vietnam. So they're both emerging, they're both great opportunities in the future, but they are different from each other as well.
What were some of the groups you met with or things you saw along the trade mission?
First of all, the state of Iowa, the IEDA, did a fantastic job setting up both of these trips. And in country, U.S. Grains Council, U.S. Soybean Export Council, U.S. Meats Export Federation, all had a hand in our daily tours and the people that we met with. And it was very pointed, very appropriate for the purpose of our trip. We met with feed mills, we met with processors, markets, both in the traditional sense in those countries, which is a very unique style to the United States, as well as the more modern markets, grocery stores and supermarkets and some of those things. So we saw basically a really nice broad cut of the food production, distribution sectors of their economies.
And were they open and receptive, a desire for more trade and a better relationship with the U.S. and Iowa?
Yeah, everybody that we met with, everybody in the country was very friendly, regardless of the conversation topic. But everybody, when it got down to business, they were all looking to the United States to provide more stability in their growing economies. We did talk about some of the challenges that are currently in place and things that we can work on, but they're very excited for the growth. They're excited for the future opportunities to continue trade, open up some of those opportunities so that they can continue their aggressive growth in their region. So,
yeah. What are some of those challenges? Can you give us one or two examples?
Yeah, so Vietnam specifically, the United States, we are the only non-free trade partner with Vietnam currently. So those tariffs that are in place now are real, they are a burden, and to change those into either reasonable tariffs or reduced tariffs significantly are certainly an opportunity. And if we can get to our place where we can develop a free trade agreement with them, that's certainly going to open doors. We've got some logistics issues to figure out in the Philippines. So one thing that I found very, very interesting was because of the archipelago with the Philippines, the total transportation costs to get to the Philippines is equal to the amount to distribute food within the Philippines. So you've got a massive logistical nightmare when it comes to those archipelago countries. That was something that I found very, very interesting.
Yeah, and that's certainly a barrier when it raises the cost of food.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, we all understand logistics and transportation, and so to know that in a country like that transportation cost is essentially doubled. They're a very young culture. Both countries are very young cultures. They're both heavy in social media, so they look towards those opportunities through a lot of those platforms, and the United States leads in many ways. So those countries are very excited to trade with the United States in the future, should we be able to deal with some of these challenges.
Absolutely. One thing that I've read a little bit about is with a younger population, there's maybe more of an emphasis or a shift to quick serve foods, maybe ready to eat foods. Did you notice any of that?
Yes and no. The younger generation there, certainly that's true, but like in Vietnam specifically, still 70% of their food goes through their traditional markets. So, and their traditional markets are, like I said, are very different than what we're used to here. They are very much the mom and pop curbside type mentality. You know, you go to somebody specifically for a specific bowl that you want to use, or a type of meat that you want to buy, or a specific fruit. So you go to a different person who specializes in those, and they're all together in the same region, but it's just very, very different. And that 70% of the food transfers through markets like that still in Vietnam, and some of that is due to in-country infrastructure, the reliability of energy or refrigeration, some of those modern amenities that many people in the United States don't even think about anymore. But those traditional markets give a majority of the Vietnamese the ability to get what they want almost on a daily aspect, so that they don't have to deal with some of the modern conveniences that most of us understand as a part of our normal daily life.
And you mentioned a desire for more protein. What extent are they looking to import the protein from the U.S. versus raising livestock or in their own country?
So U.S. Meat Export Federation has done a tremendous job in both of these countries, and the United States has a huge opportunity ahead of them. Both countries, pork is their number one protein that they eat, and it's in almost every meal that is served. We had a lot of conversations around ASF and some of those challenges, the quality of meat, the way that the two countries interpret quality is different. So specifically the conversation we had when we were in the Philippines talking about pork. Most Americans, the processors here in the United States, trim a lot of the back fat off of, say, the pork chop. So you only have a small layer of back fat on the pork chop. In the Philippines, they want the full half inch on their pork chop. They want to see that. They identify that as a higher quality. So to have the processor here as part of their process in their way of doing business, those things get trimmed off. That creates a challenge for the taste of the people within the Philippines and Vietnam, because they want to see those extra trimmings. It's part of their culture and part of the way they identify quality in their foods.
Yeah, so that's why it's important to have the whole supply chain involved. You can't just send one commodity product and expect them to purchase.
Yeah, exactly.
Brent, shifting gears a little bit, earlier this year, a couple of Iowa Farm Bureau board members were part of a trade mission to Japan and South Korea. What did they find in those countries?
Yeah, so South Korea and Japan are very different markets than Vietnam and the Philippines. So South Korea and Japan, they've been longtime trading partners with the U.S. We have long-standing relationships as far as shipping over beef and some of those commodities. The average age in those countries is a lot older than Vietnam and the Philippines. So you've got mature markets in Korea and Japan, both economically as well as socially. And, what their expectations are already fairly westernized, fairly modernized. And that's a big distinction between the two trips. South Korea, Japan, modern, mature. Vietnam and the Philippines, emerging and opportunistic.
You mentioned we're at a disadvantage with Vietnam in some free trade agreements. I think that's also the case in some of the other Asian countries. They're moving forward with trade agreements that don't involve the U.S. How will that impact Iowa farmers in the long run?
Well, really that's something that we need to make sure that our federal government really pays attention to, is our opportunities for trade. And the USDA truly has been the agency within the United States that's been active in some of these opportunities in trade. And it's important to promote agriculture through that, clearly as the number one value in that trade chain. We need to make sure that the FTR is on board and continue to push in those avenues as well. It creates an opportunity for not only for markets and profitability, but stability not only for those countries that are emerging and need some food security, specifically in light of the Ukraine-Russia issue. There's a lot of countries really looking for that sense of next level relationships, but it also solidifies the risk for production within here in the United States and our farmers and the production system chain and logistics all the way through. So trade is always good within the agriculture sector, and we're doing everything that we can to try to find those opportunities and cultivate those relationships.
Yeah, as we know, it is a global market, and if the United States and Iowa don't step up and fill those needs, there are other competitors that are willing to try to do so.
No doubt about it. Globally, there are so many players. I mean, South America is clearly the supplier that's challenging the United States. Are there opportunities that we can continue to work together with some of those countries as we try to feed the world in emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, Africa, and around the globe?
Brent, just to wrap up here, what else is Farm Bureau doing to help promote trade development efforts? Any other plans, meetings later this year, things that are upcoming?
I continue to have some personal conversations with some other countries, and I hope that those develop into something that we can talk about in the future. But one thing that's clearly solidified in the schedule is in June, we are sending a market study trip over to the UK. So as Great Britain and that region is navigating their new place through their Brexit conversations, and what are our opportunities, and have they changed? Is the relationship different than it has been in the past? And so as we continue to find opportunities to travel the world post-COVID and those conversations are easier to be had. The UK's hopefully one of those places that we'll find some opportunities here in a very mature, very modern market, and we'll continue to look for those opportunities in other parts of the globe as well.
As you just heard from President Johnson there, trade relationships are an ongoing effort. Iowa stands to gain a lot from new trade avenues, so Iowa Farm Bureau will continue to seek out those opportunities when they present themselves. Next up is Brian Waddingham, Executive Director of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers. Earlier this year, the Alameda County Sheriff's Department began investigating a case of barn vandalism, which involved the vandals attempting to set barns on fire, which were full of pigs. Brian's here to tell us more about the case and how the coalition is stepping in to help local law enforcement. Spokesman reporter Corey Munson has the story.
Brian, we want to check in and get an update from you on the situation in Alameda County involving arson report on a hog farm. So for those not familiar with this case, can you tell us a little bit about what happened, what we know about the situation, and where it stands right now?
Sure. So we had a pork producer from Alameda County reach out to the coalition in March, just expressing some concern over what he considered to be vandalism on his hog farm. He had several barns, but two were targeted. And in both cases, the person or persons attempted to throw Molotov cocktails through the tunnel fan opening and burn the barns down. And I guess what was really concerning to us is that the barns were full of pigs. And the coalition, we strongly condemn any type of livestock or animal abuse. So we jumped right on this and got started on putting together a reward to help this farmer.
And it's important to note that none of the barns were destroyed.
Yeah, there was actually very minimal damage to the barns. One of the Molotov cocktails did not light, so there wasn't really any damage. The other one caught a little bit of the outside of the barn on fire, and it just caused a little damage to the siding. So fortunately, no great loss of property on this one.
Are there any suspects in this case at this time?
Right now the sheriff is following up on some leads, keeping it pretty hush-hush up there right now. But again, really an isolated case, and then we really haven't established a motive yet as to why these barns were targeted.
Kind of going along with that, then, as I understand it, CSIF is offering a reward. Can you tell us a little bit about why you felt it was important to offer that reward and kind of what it entails?
Once we found out what the situation was, the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers Board of Directors felt very strongly that something needed to be done and that a $10,000 reward would hopefully be the trigger to bring forward some information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for the vandalism and trying to cause the damage that they were trying to cause. And again, I just want to reiterate, I think why we felt as strongly as we did about this particular case is that, there was a lot of pigs that were going to probably lose their lives if those barns would have caught on fire. So we feel a $10,000 reward, also coupled with another $5,000 reward from local support in Alameda County, put together a pretty attractive reward incentive for someone to step forward and hopefully share some details about what they know.
Has CSIF offered this kind of reward in the past?
Yeah, actually, this would be the fourth time we've offered a reward for vandalism to livestock farms. The first one was back in 2008, and then there were two others in 2010. So quite a break there, but unfortunately, it was time to step up again and offer a reward for the person or persons responsible for this.
Is this an unusual occurrence in Iowa, or are we seeing trespassing and vandalism situations escalating in the last few years?
So far, this seems to be an isolated case. The Alameda County Sheriff has done a fantastic job up there reaching out to other surrounding counties, and there's really has not been any other reports of vandalism or attempted vandalism. So right now, we hope this was just an isolated case, and we're not going to see any others throughout the state.
I guess this is also a good reminder for livestock producers to remain vigilant of activity on their farms. What sort of precautions or warning systems do you recommend farmers have in place?
Well, we are, big believers in lighting. We do recommend that farmers have lights installed, especially around entryways to the facility. Also, motion-activated floodlights work really well. There's a lot of those now that are available with a camera. So that light comes on, it does start taking photos. But then also, in addition to that, surveillance cameras. We really like one placed outside of the property to try to catch a license plate number or description of the vehicle. And then again, a camera at the door entrance, so you could hopefully catch a face or some other distinguishing feature and identify the people coming into your barns. So those would be some really good ones that you could do. Very easy. They're not that expensive. And when you compare it to insurance costs, this would definitely be a much cheaper route to go. And then also gating. Put gates across the entrance if it's a standalone site away from a house. Put a gate down there. And then you could also make sure you've got all the doors locked. And then it's also a good idea to vary your routine. You might show up every morning at 8 o'clock to do chores there, but then come back again. Maybe it's at 11, maybe it's at 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock, but just keep that routine varied and don't give would-be criminals an opportunity to pattern your coming and going from that facility.
Also good to remember, be sure if a farmer does see or suspect something on their property, they need to call law enforcement rather than try to take the situation into their own hands and confront those people.
Yeah, we recommend never approach a vehicle you don't recognize or people you don't recognize. Call the sheriff immediately. If you happen to drive by and see it and you can get a description of the vehicle or a license plate number, write that down and get that to the sheriff. But yeah, don't engage with anybody like that. It's all about safety today.
Shifting gears a little bit, I understand CSIF has been getting a lot of calls lately from farmers considering adding livestock to their operation. What are you hearing from folks?
Calls are definitely up during the month of March. Have received a great number of cattle calls, and I think that has to do with the weather. Snow, rain, wind, you name it. We've seen it all here recently. But whether it's calving barns, finishing barns, we've got some farmers that are looking to put up open feedlots when the conditions are right outside. Also, along with that, we know DNR is out doing more inspections. So with the snow melt and spring rains coming, it's always a great time to have the coalition come out and do an assessment of your open feedlot and make sure you would pass a DNR or EPA inspection. In addition to cattle calls, the hog calls are also coming in. We've got pig companies that are looking to partner with farmers to put up new nursery barns or finishing barns. Also working with some niche pork producers as well to put up hoop barns to feed hogs in. And then also even dairy, poultry, and turkey farmers are calling as well to talk about maybe putting up a new barn or a parlor, maybe expanding the freestall barn. And then finally, trees. We're getting to that season again where, you start thinking about putting up a windbreak or planting some trees. Now's the best time to get planting. So when the conditions are fit outside, we can get those trees in the ground. So a lot of optimism right now, I would call it.
So if a farmer wants to start researching the idea of adding livestock, where can they start?
So probably the best thing to do would be to visit our website, supportfarmers.com, and go to the rules and regulations tab. And that'll kind of give you an idea of what you could be up against. And I would also then encourage anybody to call the coalition, and we can just do an over-the-phone consultation about what rules would apply to what you're proposing to do. Because the one thing that we really like to stress today to farmers is that no matter what you want to build, if it has livestock, it has rules. Whether it's a 10-head calving barn, 20-head milking parlor, or maybe even an open lot to finish 20 pigs. You've got rules to follow today. So if the phone conversation isn't enough, then the coalition, we come right out to the farm, again, at no charge, completely confidential. Make sure that barn is sited in the right location, explain all of the rules and regulations to you, and really kind of help set you up for success down the road so you don't have any surprises from DNR or a neighbor. But yeah, we kind of cross all the T's, dot the I's when we come out to your farm.
free, confidential, and just wonderful people to work with. So Brian, thank you so much for being here and for being part of CSIF and offering this. One more time, how do folks find your staff?
Yeah, you can find us online at supportfarmers.com or give us a call anytime at 800-932-2436.
It's encouraging to hear Brian say that this appears to be an isolated incident in northeast Iowa, but he also shared some good advice for the livestock farmers listening to this episode to hopefully make your livestock sites less of a target for potential vandalism. If you'd like to read more about this particular vandalism case, the Coalition's reward, or the Coalition's list of recommendations for livestock farmers to help deter vandalism, we've linked that information in the notes for this podcast episode, along with the Coalition's website and toll-free phone number. That's it for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you found it helpful and that you'll join us for the next episode on April 24th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.